They told him he was helpless, that he would never be able to take care of himself, a blind boy, lost in a world of shadows, with no one to guide him. But then a stray dog appeared, and what this dog did for him, it was nothing short of a miracle. Stick around, because this story will break your heart, and then heal it. Life isn't easy when the world refuses to see you. For little Ethan, every day felt like a battle. He couldn't see the sky. He couldn't watch the trees sway in the wind. And worst of all, he couldn't see the faces of people who looked down on him with pity. But then came Max, a stray dog with eyes full of something Ethan had never felt before, understanding. This isn't just a story about a boy and a dog. It's about friendship, resilience, and a bond that defied all odds. And what happens in the end? Well, you won't see it coming. Ethan had never known what colors looked like. People would describe them to him. His mother said the sky was blue, the grass was green, and the sun was golden. But to Ethan, these words meant nothing. His world wasn't just dark, it was silent in a way that only the blind truly understand. He had learned to navigate his surroundings through touch, sound, and memory. He could recognize his mother's voice in a crowded room. He knew the number of steps from his bedroom to the kitchen. He had memorized the way his school hallways felt under his fingers, the rough walls, the chipped lockers, the way the air smelled slightly of chalk and disinfectant. But knowing your way around and feeling like you belong are two very different things. And Ethan never felt like he belonged. At school, the kids weren't cruel, not exactly. They didn't bully him or push him around, but they also didn't include him. They didn't understand him. How could they? They could run, chase each other, play soccer, read comic books, things Ethan would never experience. He would sit alone during recess, his fingers tracing patterns on the wooden bench, listening to the laughter that never included him. Teachers were kind, but they treated him like something fragile. They spoke to him in soft voices, always guiding him, always careful. But all Ethan wanted was to be seen as normal. But normal wasn't for kids like him. At home, things weren't much better. His mother worked 2 jobs, just to keep the house running. She loved him. Ethan never doubted that, but love didn't change the fact that she was exhausted. Some nights, she came home too tired to talk. She would just press a kiss to his forehead, whisper, "I love you, baby," and collapse onto the couch. Ethan never complained. He knew she was doing her best, but it didn't make the loneliness any easier. When other kids went home to play with their siblings or video games, Ethan went home to silence. There was no father waiting for him, no brothers or sisters to tease him, just him, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the distant sound of cars passing by the window. Some nights, he lay awake, listening to the wind against the walls, feeling like the whole world had forgotten about him. Maybe they had. It was a cold evening in late October when everything changed. Ethan was walking home from school, his white cane tapping rhythmically against the pavement. His mother was working late, and he had refused the school's offer for a ride home. He hated feeling dependent. He wanted to prove, to himself, to the world, that he could manage. But tonight the air felt different, heavy, like something was about to happen. The wind had picked up, carrying the scent of rain. Ethan tightened his grip on his cane, counting his steps like always. 30 steps from the last turn, then another 40 before the crosswalk. He had done this 100 times before, but then something unexpected. A sound, soft, weak, a whimper. Ethan stopped, tilted his head, listening. It came again, barely louder than the rustling leaves. A cry, a plea. Ethan turned toward the sound, stepping cautiously forward. His foot brushed against something damp, fur. He froze. Then, slowly, he knelt down and reached out. Cold, wet fur met his fingertips. A dog, small, trembling. The poor thing was soaked to the bone, shivering violently. Ethan hesitated. He had never touched a dog before. He had heard people describe them, of course, how their fur could be soft or wiry, how their tails wagged when they were happy. But actually feeling one, that was different. "Hey there," he whispered. "Are you lost too?" The dog let out a tiny whimper, then pressed its cold nose into Ethan's palm. A strange warmth filled Ethan's chest. He didn't know what the dog looked like, but he could feel him, thin, weak, desperate for comfort. And in that moment, Ethan understood something. This dog wasn't just lost. He was alone, just like him. Ethan had never made a decision so quickly in his life. Without a second thought, he pulled off his jacket and wrapped the dog in it. The tiny body shivered against his chest, but the warmth of the fabric seemed to help. He knew his mother wouldn't be happy. They barely had enough food for themselves. A dog, that was another mouth to feed. But as Ethan carried the trembling animal home, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't walking alone. When he stepped into the house, his mother gasped, "Ethan, what is that?" He didn't have to see her face to know she was worried. "It's a dog, Mom," Ethan said simply. "He needs help." She sighed heavily. "Ethan, we can't afford a pet. We can barely." "I know." His voice was quiet. "But he needs me." There was a long silence. Then, she stepped forward, touching the wet fur. The dog whimpered slightly, but didn't pull away. Ethan heard his mother exhale slowly. Then, to his surprise, she muttered, "Get him a towel." Ethan's heart swelled. That was the beginning. The dog was a mess. He was filthy, his ribs showing under his damp fur. Ethan didn't need to see to know he had been starving. His mother helped clean him up, drying him with an old towel and offering him scraps of chicken. The dog ate so fast that Ethan could hear him gulping. They sat together on the floor, Ethan's hand resting on the dog's back. "What should we call him?" he asked. His mother sighed. "Ethan, I don't think we should. Just a name," Ethan insisted. She was silent for a moment. Then she murmured, "Max." Ethan smiled. "Max," he repeated. The dog wagged his tail. And just like that, he wasn't just a stray anymore. He was Max. Ethan expected Max to leave. He had saved him, given him food and warmth. But stray dogs don't stay. They move on. But Max didn't leave. That night, Ethan felt something strange. As he lay in bed, listening to the quiet house, he heard breathing. Soft, steady breathing. Max was lying beside his bed, not in the corner, not near the door, right next to him. Ethan reached down, running his fingers through the soft fur. Max lifted his head, nudging Ethan's hand. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel alone. From that day forward, Max was always there. When Ethan walked, Max followed. When he sat alone at school, Max rested his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan didn't need to see Max to feel his presence. And somehow, that was enough. But Ethan knew it wasn't that simple. They couldn't keep Max forever. His mother had made it clear. Money was tight. They had barely enough food as it was. Ethan was terrified that one day, he would wake up and Max would be gone. And even worse, he knew his mother was thinking about it too. One night, he overheard her on the phone. "I don't know what to do," she said. "He loves that dog, but we just can't afford another mouth to feed." Ethan's stomach twisted. Max wasn't just a dog. He was his best friend. And soon, he might have to say goodbye. For as long as Ethan could remember, the outside world had been a scary place. He relied on his mother to guide him, his teachers to help him move through the hallways, and his cane to tell him where the ground changed beneath his feet. He had never walked outside alone before. Never dared. The world was too big, too unpredictable. Cars sped by without warning. Sidewalks cracked and changed beneath his feet. People walked past him, too fast for him to react. There was too much movement, too much noise, too much uncertainty. But then came Max. Max, who stayed close. Max, who nudged Ethan when something was in his way. Max, who barked at sudden noises, keeping Ethan alert. At first, Ethan still hesitated. What if Max made a mistake? What if he stepped into traffic or tripped over something Max didn't notice? But Max never let him fall. The first time Ethan walked outside without his mother, it was terrifying. The air felt too open, the silence too heavy. He gripped Max's leash so tightly that his fingers ached. But then, Max led him forward, a step at a time. Carefully, confidently, Ethan breathed, and for the first time in his life, he took a step into the world without fear. Trusting Max wasn't easy. At home, Ethan could memorize the layout, but outside, everything changed. Sidewalks had uneven cracks, streets had potholes, and worst of all, people who rushed past without noticing him, people who might bump into him, or worse, ignore him completely. But Max was always there. Ethan learned quickly. He learned the way Max's body moved when he sensed something ahead, the way he would pause slightly before a step down, or nudge Ethan's leg to steer him around something, the way his ears twitched when someone approached too fast. One day, they walked farther than Ethan had ever gone before, past the grocery store, past the park, and then Ethan heard it. Traffic, loud, fast, and unpredictable. He froze. His grip on Max's leash tightened. His breath quickened. A hand usually guided him at crosswalks. But today, there was no hand. Just Max. Ethan hesitated, and then Max did something. He pressed against Ethan's leg. Firm, steady, unshaken. A message. "I've got you." Ethan swallowed. The light changed. Cars stopped. Max stepped forward. Ethan followed. And just like that, he crossed the street. Days passed. Then weeks. Ethan and Max became inseparable. They walked everywhere together, school, the park, even the grocery store. People started noticing them. At first, they just stared. Then, they started whispering, "That's the blind kid. Look at the dog. He's leading him." Ethan ignored them. He was used to whispers. But something was different now. This time, the whispers weren't pity. They were amazement. One afternoon, Ethan and Max were at the park. For the first time in years, Ethan laughed. Really laughed. He sat on the bench, feeling the sun on his face, listening to Max run in circles, his paws kicking up dirt. Nearby, a little girl giggled. "Mommy, look, the dog is guiding him." Ethan smiled. He didn't care who saw. For the first time, he felt free. Then a voice, deep, uncertain. "Excuse me, son." Ethan turned toward it. "Where did you get that dog?" Ethan hesitated. Something about the man's voice was strange. "He found me," Ethan said. A long silence. Then a deep breath. "That dog he's trained. That's not just any dog." The man stepped closer. "That's a guide dog." Ethan's heart pounded. "Max, a guide dog." The man introduced himself as James. He had spent years training service dogs, specifically guide dogs. And from the moment he saw Max, he knew. The way Max moved, the way he reacted, the way he instinctively protected Ethan. This dog wasn't just some stray, James said. Someone trained him. Someone prepared him for this. Ethan swallowed hard. "But how?" he asked. "Where did he come from?" James sighed. "I don't know, but I can tell you this. Guide dogs don't just appear. They're raised, trained, and tested before they're given to someone." Ethan ran his fingers through Max's fur. "Then why was he on the street?" James shook his head. "Maybe he got lost. Maybe his owner couldn't keep him. But whatever happened, he found you." Ethan's hands tightened around Max's leash. It was true. Max had found him. And now Ethan understood why. That night, Ethan sat with Max, running his fingers through his thick fur. "Did you really train for this?" he whispered. Max licked Ethan's hand. Ethan smiled. "You knew, didn't you?" The dog didn't answer, but Ethan already knew. Max wasn't just some stray. He was meant for him. James offered to help. If Max is a guide dog, then there are things he already knows. But there are things you'll need to learn too. And so the training began. James showed Ethan how to give proper commands, how to move in sync with Max, how to recognize the subtle ways Max communicated. "He's trained to protect you," James said, "but you have to trust him completely." And Ethan did. For the first time, he truly let go. No more hesitation, no more second guessing. Max led, Ethan followed, and together they walked. One day, James set up a test, a walk through the city, without Ethan's cane. Just Max. Ethan hesitated. The cane was his safety, his security. But then Max nudged him. Ethan took a breath. "Okay, boy, let's go." Step by step, they moved forward. Sidewalks, curbs, crosswalks. People brushed past. Max led him safely through it all. And then, before Ethan even realized it, they had made it home. No cane, no hand guiding him. Just Max. Ethan sat on the front steps, Max's head resting on his knee. He thought about all the days he had spent feeling invisible, all the nights he had spent feeling alone. And now he had Max. Not just a pet, not just a friend, but his eyes, his freedom, his family. Ethan ran his fingers through Max's fur, smiling. "I guess we were meant for each other, huh?" Max wagged his tail, and for the first time, Ethan didn't just feel safe, he felt whole. For weeks, life felt like it had finally found a rhythm. Ethan and Max had become inseparable. They walked through the city with ease now. Sidewalks, crosswalks, curbs. Ethan no longer hesitated. He trusted Max completely. More than that, he felt something he had never felt before. Independence. For the first time in his life, he wasn't waiting for someone to help him. He wasn't relying on a teacher or a stranger or even his mother. Max was all he needed. And so, on that rainy afternoon, Ethan had no reason to believe anything would go wrong. But life had other plans. The rain had been light at first, a soft drizzle, just enough to make the air cool, the sidewalks damp. Ethan didn't mind. He loved the feel of the mist against his face, the way it carried the scent of wet earth and pavement. Max walked beside him, steady as always. His leash was firm in Ethan's grip, their steps in sync. It was a short walk home, no more than 10 minutes. They had done it countless times before, but something felt off. Max's body tensed. Ethan felt it immediately, the shift in his posture, the way his breathing changed. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. Max's ears flicked back, his steps slowed. Ethan hesitated. He had learned to trust Max's instincts. If Max sensed danger, there was danger, but everything sounded normal. The hum of traffic in the distance, the occasional splash of a car passing over a puddle, the muffled sound of footsteps as people hurried by, their coats rustling against the rain. Ethan took a deep breath. It was just another walk home. Then, screeching tires, loud, sharp, too close. Ethan's heart pounded. A car, coming fast, too fast. For a split second, time slowed. The world around him shrank. His grip on Max's leash tightened instinctively. Then, a push, a desperate bark, and suddenly, Ethan was falling. His hands hit the cold, wet pavement. His cane clattered somewhere beside him. Silence. Then gasps. Voices. Panic. Someone grabbed his arm. "Son, your dog, he saved you." Ethan barely heard them. His ears rang. His breath was uneven. He scrambled forward, his hands searching blindly, his heart slamming against his ribs. Max! His fingers touched fur. Damp, cold, but moving, breathing. Max was breathing. Ethan let out a shaky gasp. His hands ran over Max's body, desperate to find where he was hurt. A whimper. Ethan flinched. Max never whined. Never. His hands found Max's paw, wet, trembling. Then voices. The driver. I didn't see them. The rain. Oh my God. I didn't see them. Someone else. The dog. He pushed him out of the way. If not for him, the words hung in the air. If not for Max. Ethan swallowed hard. He already knew. The crowd grew around them. People murmured, some asking if Ethan was hurt, if he needed help. But Ethan didn't care about any of that. His hand stayed on Max, his fingers tightening around his fur. A siren blared in the distance. The world felt too loud, too chaotic, too much. And Max had saved him. But at what cost? Ethan sat on a stiff hospital chair, his hands wrapped around a cup of untouched tea. It had been hours since the accident, hours since he had felt Max's warmth against his leg. His mother sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. She had cried when she saw him, running her hands over his face, his arms, making sure he wasn't hurt. But Ethan barely spoke. All he cared about was Max, and Max was in the next room. Finally, footsteps, a door opening. James. Ethan didn't need to see his face to know what he was feeling. The hesitation in his steps, the heavy sigh. Ethan gripped the armrests of his chair. "Tell me." James pulled up a chair beside him. "Max is going to be okay." Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His entire body sagged with relief. "But," James continued, "he's hurt." Ethan stiffened. A fractured paw, some bruised ribs. "But he'll recover. He just needs rest." Ethan nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I need to see him." James didn't argue. The moment Ethan entered the room, he knew where Max was. Even before James guided him forward, he felt it, felt the familiar warmth, felt the steady, rhythmic breathing. "Hey, boy," Ethan whispered, kneeling beside the bed. Max let out a soft, tired whimper. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing against Max's fur. He found the bandage wrapped around his paw, the warmth of his body still strong despite everything. And then, Ethan felt something else. A nudge, slow, weak, but unmistakable. Max pressing his nose into Ethan's palm. Ethan let out a breathless laugh, his voice breaking. "You scared me," he whispered. Max huffed. Ethan wiped at his face. He hadn't realized he was crying. "You saved my life, Max." A pause. Then a slow, steady thump against the bed. Max's tail. Even now, even after everything, Max was still wagging his tail. And that was when Ethan knew. No matter what happened, no matter how hard things got, they were going to be okay, because they had each other. After that day, everything changed. Ethan no longer felt like the boy who was always left behind. He no longer hesitated before stepping outside, no longer feared the streets filled with unknown obstacles, because now he had Max. And Max, he wasn't just a dog anymore. He was family. Their bond had been tested in ways Ethan never imagined. It had been forged through trust, through love, through sacrifice. Max had done something no one else had ever done for him. He had risked his own life to protect Ethan's, and that meant everything. News of the accident spread. It started small, a few whispers in the neighborhood, a kind stranger sharing the story. But soon, it traveled beyond that. A journalist picked it up, then another. Before Ethan even realized it, his story was being told everywhere. The blind boy and the stray who saved him. People were inspired. They wanted to know more. Who was this dog? Where had he come from? How had he ended up with Ethan? And more importantly, how had he known exactly what to do? Calls started coming in. Local news stations wanted interviews. Animal organizations reached out. Some people even offered to adopt Max, believing he deserved a better home. Ethan clenched his fists at that. Max already had a home, their home, and Ethan wasn't about to let anyone take him away. One day, a representative from a well-known guide dog training organization reached out. They had heard about Max, the stray who had somehow instinctively acted as a service dog, despite never being trained. They wanted to help. They wanted to train Max professionally, for free. Ethan hesitated at first. Would Max change? Would their bond be different? James, the former trainer who had first recognized Max's abilities, reassured him. This isn't about changing Max, James had said. It's about giving him the skills to do what he already knows how to do, only better. And so, Ethan agreed. The training sessions were challenging, but not in the way Ethan had expected. Max was a fast learner. He had already been guiding Ethan before, but now, with expert trainers refining his skills, he became even more in tune with Ethan's needs. They learned new commands, new signals, new ways to communicate without words. And for Ethan, it was like learning a new language, one where trust spoke louder than anything else. Max would stop at every curb, making sure Ethan was aware before stepping forward. He would guide him around obstacles without hesitation, never pulling too hard, never moving too fast. But most importantly, Max gave Ethan confidence. For the first time in his life, Ethan didn't just rely on someone to help him navigate the world. He owned his space in it. Months passed, and something incredible happened. Ethan started doing things he had never dared to do before. He went to the grocery store alone. He took the bus. He walked through crowded streets without panicking, without hesitating. People saw him now, not just as a blind boy struggling to find his way, but as a young man walking with purpose. And every time someone noticed Max, their eyes softened. Some asked about him. Others simply smiled. Ethan could hear the admiration in their voices. They weren't pitying him anymore. They were proud of him. And that was a feeling Ethan had never known before. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, the same park where they had first met James, Ethan sat on a bench, feeling the breeze against his face. Max sat beside him, his body pressed close, his breathing steady. Ethan reached down, running his fingers through Max's fur. "Do you know what you are, Max?" Ethan murmured. Max let out a soft huff, tilting his head. "You're my hero." Max wagged his tail, pressing his nose into Ethan's palm. And in that moment, Ethan knew. Max had finally found his place in the world, not as a stray, not as a lost dog searching for a home, but as Ethan's guide, his protector, his best friend. Ethan's mother watched from a distance, her heart full. She had spent so many years worrying about her son, worrying if he would ever truly be happy. But now, she didn't worry anymore, because she had seen it, the way Ethan walked now, the way he laughed more, the way he spoke with confidence. And she knew this was the life Ethan had always deserved, a life where he wasn't afraid, a life where he wasn't alone, a life where he was free. Because with Max by his side, anything was possible. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. See you in the next one.